Hey all you people, it is I, Jeb of JebTube. Now, I've heard some of you claim that it seems I'm just destined to hate pretty much everything I play nowadays. And while that's not exactly an unfair statement to make, I want to share with you a franchise that isn't anything new to the world, but is something I've been really getting into lately. A video game series that, let's be real, most people these days probably remember exclusively because of Captain Falcon's presence in Super Smash Bros. I mean, nothing wrong with that. If anything, I'd say it's powerful stuff. Had I not been introduced to this killer music, this sense of never-ending speed, and this incredibly hokey cast of characters through the Smash series, well, I may have never been inclined to look into it at all. But unfortunately, my young mind has only recently tapped into this hidden gem of a series, and while Super Smash Bros. Might have invigorated a following for F-Zero, that vigor wouldn't last for too long. It's commonplace to say that's a damn shame, but the extent of that is what I want to talk about today. Because, oh boy, I may not really be an F-Zero expert, but I think I get it. I think I jive with this one, and in the event that it never returns, I feel more people are obligated to throw their takes on the series out there. For me personally, without the biases that come with growing up on it. So why is this F-Zero so great? Well, to answer that question, we must first look at F-Zero, the Super Nintendo game. One of the only two initial launch titles for the system in Japan, F-Zero is a product dedicated to showing off one of the many things that made this Nintendo Entertainment System super.
Mode 7!
A form of creating a pseudo 3D environment around the player, creating a far more immersive racing experience that just couldn't be done on the NES. But if you're watching this video, you already know that, I bet. So why am I telling you this, Why should you care? What'd you have for lunch today? Well, because this very thing is what gave F-Zero its identity straight out the gate. This push to be a next-gen home console experience. This push to blow your mind with its incredible speed and processing power. It almost sounds like, no, we're not talking about him today. But speaking of blue speed demons, Captain Falcon himself. Apparently he was originally envisioned as the flagship character of the Super Nintendo. Yeah, that didn't really pan out. Mario was already Nintendo's beloved poster child on NES and further cemented his place on the throne by starring in Super Mario World, the other game that launched alongside F-Zero. Despite this, the idea of Captain Falcon just goes to show the intent behind F-Zero. This time, it was a man's game. This time, you were really playing with power. But something that bold was, in truth, a pretty simple game made by like 12 people. You start it up, and you only see 4 racers to pick from. Captain Falcon, Dr. Stewart, Pico, and Samurai Goro. You don't ever really get to see these racers in-game, just their vehicles, but as with many games at the time, the secret is in the manual. The game's extra material is filled with cheesy comics and excerpts that showcase just how much of a badass dude this Falcon guy is. And the rest of the racers are futuristic, over-the-top, and alien in nature. A relic of a time? Yeah, but it definitely carves that iconic niche for F-Zero to fill in Nintendo's wide repertoire of recognizable franchises. See, this isn't just a man's game because Captain Falcon told you so. You enter a Grand Prix, and at first it seems understandable to control. You can get a grip on it, but I'm sure most players will eventually get to White Land 2 and go,
you know, this game's actually kinda hard.
Of course, this ramp, which requires you to hold down at full speed, is a bit of a hope you read the manual trap, but the sentiment is still there. And that player is not even on one of the harder difficulties. This difficulty would go on to be one of the most defining traits of the F-Zero series. There's no joke or hyperbole about it. This was an intense racing competition. Now, F-Zero was created about 2 years before Super Mario Kart would appear on the scene, kickstarting the ever so popular Mario Kart series and inspiring tons of other racers in the process. So a lot of things that would become conventional for Grand Prix racing were not things the original F-Zero abided by. This game is more of an elimination round kind of deal. It doesn't really matter whether or not you consistently get first place, it's all about making sure you don't end up lower than third place by the end of each race. If you fall behind the increasingly demanding rank with every passing lap, You retire. No ifs, ands, or buts. There are no items. There is no pity. It is you and the road. And the infinite supply of nameless assholes who randomly spawn in only to wreck your machine. F-Zero outfits the player with an energy meter. Once the energy depletes, Jesus! Either you're restarting the race with one of your extra lives, or you're out of a competition. And that's all there is to it. All you really do in this game is drive forward, but the added pressure of irreversible death and elimination through failure to maintain speed makes this more complex than it seems. Every movement counts. Every time you hit a wall, you'll pay for it, and past a certain point on Master difficulty, you can pretty much kiss the goal goodbye if you make one wrong move. Doubly so if you're playing as anybody other than Samurai Goro, who's pretty much objectively the best character in the game since he doesn't slide while turning and has the highest top speed. Cool. You're also granted up to 3 boosts every time you pass the finish line, and much like perfecting the art of turning, the moment you decide to press the boost button will make or break the race. This game is nothing but mastering the simplest of mechanics. One could call it trial and error, but the thing about the F-Zero series that I like is that the easiest difficulty is just challenging enough to where new players can quickly understand it, yet feel like they need to try their hardest and do better with every passing course. Once you're well acquainted with the game on that level, it's up to you whether or not you want to kick it into high gear. However, even with that said, I feel like this game can dip into some pretty frustrating territory. I'll wait a little bit to explain how, as I think the next game's improvements alone can illuminate the issue. Before I get into that, I think it would be criminal to not highlight one of the most recognizable aspects of F-Zero, and that would be its music. As far back as the debut game, F-Zero music was undeniably instant classic material. If you're my age, then there's no doubt you've heard this game's compositions in one form or another while playing Super Smash Bros. And if you say you didn't feel cooler listening to it, then I think you're a liar. It gets you pumped up. It makes you feel badass when you win in the face of certain doom. And when you're not winning, it puts the pressure on you to change that. All originating from a 16-bit console. Now, it was a simplistic launch title, so the soundtrack isn't very expansive, and I certainly think you'll find more complex and organic music with later SNES titles such as Donkey Kong Country or Chrono Trigger, but the vibe of F-Zero is certainly apparent. Even during the more subdued or dangerous tracks like Sand Ocean, Death Wind, or Silence, there's a particular victory within your grasp thanks to the slammin' drums and bass lines. The jump to 16-bit music from 8-bit only helps towards building the "you are playing in the future" atmosphere of F-Zero. But that's not quite where it ends. Despite being such a new IP, the game's music was unforgettable enough that it warranted a dedicated jazz arrangement album a couple years after release. I gotta say, if Mario Kart 8 wasn't convincing enough, this album does a great deal in showing how well this genre fits for a series like F-Zero. I don't just bring this up as an excuse to jam out though, I bring it up because F-Zero from the beginning had such a modernized aesthetic that propelled it to racing stardom. A personality that's able to reach out to crowds of all kinds through music. F-Zero wasn't doomed to just be a tech demo for the Super Nintendo, but rather a symbol of where we can go from here.
Oh, shit!
Released in 1998 for the Nintendo 64, the new F-Zero pushes racing to the extreme.
Not funny.
Featuring full 3D action, gravity-defying courses, 30 wacky racers to pick from, and
a stable 60 frames per second.
This game was here to make your system catch fire. only with the benefit that you won't have to get a new one. This game is already a worthy successor to the original F-Zero in concept. In every way, it's just taking the idea of the original and expanding it as much as it can while relegated to the N64. You want more racers? We got those in bulk. And man, these racers are crazy. We got superheroes, supervillains, robots, animals, and a human form of James McCloud from Star Fox 64. Yeah. When it comes to practicality though, there's a lot more to think about in F-Zero X. Starting up a race here with the trusty Blue Falcon, I can already claim the number one thing which makes this game a hell of a lot better than its predecessor is the analog stick. In the original game, I often found it very frustrating when you get bounced around like a damn pinball, and it will feel very difficult to recover from that because every time you tap left or right on the D-pad, your vehicle would twist and turn until eventually you're back on track. I understand the idea is to not get into that scenario at all, but even while making standard turns, I never felt like I truly knew how far I was going to be leaning because with the D-pad, it's all or nothing. I'm either making a big turn left or I'm repeatedly tapping the thing and hoping I turn at the proper angle. Even while using the L and R buttons, there just isn't enough of a game feel for me to know how much I need to put into a turn sometimes. I hate to be that guy, but I truly feel that a lot of the original game's difficulty comes from a stupid D-pad and other things meant to take control away from you, like the wind in Deathwind, or the fact that no matter how fast you may be moving, the computer players are consistently on your ass but the game doesn't have to keep track of every sprite's position. So this means that on higher difficulties, they'll just get everybody to rear end you, and if you have trouble maneuvering your way out of it, you're donezo. With the analog stick though, I have the nuanced control to be able to know exactly where my character is heading, and I'm able to smoothly weave my way through a crowd or around tight corners. If I get into a sticky situation, it feels like I'm in control to be able to fix it. Each racer's machine is differentiated by their weight, body, boost, and grip. In other words, it's still all about how they feel to control. It'll be a universal constant in this series that it's all down to the player and how they operate. No special moves or items or any sort of weird perks like that. But in 3D, that makes such a big impact that wasn't there in 2D. Courses now have loop-de-loops, cylinders, tunnels, massive jumps. It gives me a severe sense of vertigo. You go so fucking fast in this game that if you're not careful, you'll just ascend right off a track. It'll eventually be instilled in you that you're driving a weighted rocket ship, not a car, so vertical direction is something you also gotta keep in mind. With tracks as active and mobile as this, that's all the more reason for you to be cautious of what each racer can do. Some use their weight and top speed to just power through everything, but others can breeze through like a feather in the wind. There's all kinds of crazy shit you can do in this game simply through them giving this level of speed a third dimension, but you ain't gonna catch me trying any of this stuff. And of course, to allow the player this level of precision and skill, the developers targeted 60 frames per second, a rarity on the N64, especially for a game that doesn't rely on 2D sprites. One could say the game looks very plain as a result, but I will gladly take it, as the mere act of moving at these blistering speeds is more visually appealing to me than the road I pass over. It was apparent that the basic 3D gameplay and performance was top priority with F-Zero X, but on a more fundamental level, what does F-Zero X do that separates it from just being a radically coded 3D version of the original? Well, to that I say the dedication to skill-based design philosophy only continues with what I perceive as improvements to the game's core. Now the game is more of your standard Grand Prix. You earn enough points by the end of a cup, and victory is yours. No more elimination rounds, and no more infinite supplies of random goons to get in the way. It's a competition between you and the 29 other racers in the game. But in exchange for the more traditional premise, there's one change that really spices things up. Once you pass the first lap, you'll get boost power. From this point, you no longer gain a single boost by passing the goal line like in the first game. No, now you can ramp up the speed to your heart's content, but at the cost of your machine's health meter. This single change makes F-Zero X a risk versus reward game. Knowing just where you can get away with boosting before quickly finding a pit stop is a key satisfactory element. You can use it to keep up your momentum, you can use it defensively and recover recover from a screeching halt. It may be more deadly to you in this game, but the lifted restraint allows for better player choice and a difficulty more centered around dying rather than being stuck in dead last after one too many mistakes. Plus, it's more active. You're always thinking about your relative position to other racers and if you can manage to make the distance without wrecking your machine against the walls. But speaking of automobile wrecks, there is one other mechanic that this game adds which makes it a far more tantalizing experience, and that is the ability to kill. Death is not an obstacle that belongs only to you in F-Zero X. You can flat out destroy another racer by ramming them off a cliff or slamming them into a wall, and this will ensure that they get 0 points for that race, causing you to take a massive lead in the overall Grand Prix. The game will also explicitly tell you who you want to be aiming for in case you can't remember who's who by each vehicle. I don't blame you, Super and Mrs. Arrow look exactly the same. So yeah, what this basically results in is a level of greater strategy that makes finishing a Grand Prix all the more gratifying. You aren't totally fucked if you botch your second or third race, so long as you can catch up to the competition and put them out of commission. Ooh, and there's also this move where you can turn your machine into a Beyblade. It'll slow you down a good bit, but it can be used to clear out an entire crowd, and this is the most addicting shit ever to pull off. Booster fire! And hey, if you manage to take out 5 racers in a single round, you'll get an extra life. It's because of this one mechanic, the ability to do to others what they have always done to you, that I feel like F-Zero X encourages players to not give up during a Grand Prix. There's a way you can turn the tables whether you've died too many times or if you've been slacking in the rankings department. You have to really feel it out for yourself to get what I mean. However, there's another key factor in making this game so fun, one which you don't have to be there to experience, and that is its killer soundtrack. Beyond the fact that it's hilariously hardcore, the actual music itself boasts more layered and dynamic composition than that of other N64 contemporaries. It's only a shame that it's relegated to a console of such limited space, because it's very clear that while the first game's music would go from being modern to classic real fast, this game intended on pumping it up to the next level. This thrash metal direction is an unforeseen yet entirely appropriate follow-up to the original game's soundtrack because it had the same soul put into it. Whereas the original F-Zero's promotional material consisted of too cool for school comics, this entry decides to take that sort of aesthetic and properly work it into the actual game. So what better way to accompany this gnarly 90s nature than with some real bangers? Furthermore, following up on the fantastic album released for the original, they went ahead and released an album called F-Zero X Guitar Arrange Edition, featuring 10 of the game's tracks done with real instruments. So in case you grow tired of the synthesized N64 renditions, it doesn't get any more raw than this. And truly, I think that's all I got on this one, because the thrill of a racing sport kinda is the game. I mean, sure, true to what I said, F-Zero X elected to expand on the original in every way, and this did include alternate modes, such as Death Race and multiplayer, but I don't really have much to say on these. In Death Race, you go around and kill people, I guess, and unless all your friends know what they're doing, F-Zero doesn't really lend itself much to local multiplayer. No real shenanigans to be had when the game is so focused on skill and difficulty. It's basically just a speedrun machine at that rate. But honestly, the simple truth is that I'm just too lazy, concerned with my friend's personal being during these troubling times to bother with a bunch of versus battles. I kinda have a point I'm trying to make here with this whole thing, so for brevity, I'm not gonna really dive into the Japan exclusive expansion kit released for the N64 disk drive, although it is really neat. Never played it, but hey, it's got a machine and track editor. How about that? I'm also not interested in talking about the next game released, F-Zero Maximum Velocity. No, GBA games are nice and all, but I'm more interested in how Nintendo would go about bringing the F-Zero series to their latest and, in my opinion, greatest home console, the Nintendo GameCube. Introducing the future of racing. F-Zero GX. It's like F-Zero X, but with a G. This game is known for many things, but I think its development history is one I can't really go without noting. It's now well into the 2000s, and Nintendo's longtime rival Sega had finally raised their white flag, ceasing console development. However, with the company's shift from first to third party, a beautiful friendship could begin with its old competitor. By this point, Sega was still looking to expand interest in their arcade market, which led to a discussion with Namco about the possibility of using Nintendo's GameCube technology to create a new arcade system. Thus, the Holy Triforce was formed. Now the next step was to make a game that would, quote, stand out and draw attention to Nintendo's platform. Enter Amusement Vision, a developer for Sega that's most well known for Super Monkey Ball. It was suggested that they develop a driving game, but AV president Toshihiro Nagoshi said he would do so on the condition that it was the next title in the F-Zero series. And thus construction began on not only F-Zero GX, but also F-Zero AX for arcades, the first ever collaboration with Sega on a Nintendo project. Suffice it to say that the former competitors were really pushing F-Zero in the respective niches they occupied, even if it wasn't a flagship IP. But with this push, there came pressure for Nagoshi. This was not only his chance to make a great impression with Nintendo, but it was a large undertaking to make the newest entry in a franchise he adored. This team was out to make Sega look good. And honestly, they already had a good start in the eyes of Nintendo since their Super Monkey Ball games were GameCube exclusive. In fact, I'd argue that these two franchises have some design similarities that make it a no-brainer why Amusement Vision was granted the opportunity. So let's get into that. Straight away, it's quite apparent that this game is dedicated to performance like its predecessor, although now on a far less constrained console. F-Zero X boasted an incredible level of speed and control over the SNES original, and F-Zero GX aims to bring that same spirit to the new generation with an equally slick frame rate at negligible cost to the game's visuals. Obviously, the jump from N64 to GameCube is great for most franchises, and F-Zero is certainly no stranger. You'll now get full character models, which add just a little bit more personality into what you're playing, and organically modeled backgrounds which breathe new life into courses that otherwise don't pride themselves on unique gimmicks, definitely making each location stick out better. With how some of these courses will open up, you could definitely see how Nintendo would want to show this off at E3 or something. Like, this was the 6th generation of gaming, and now that we've got a steady hold of 3D, visions can be better realized. In addition to the clean visuals, the game feels incredibly smooth to play. I already thought F-Zero X did a masterful job at this, but the GameCube controller really adds to the experience. Obviously, I just like the controller in general, but the particular addition of analog triggers allows for you to authentically strafe left and right at whatever pace you need. Also, drifting is now a mechanic you can more easily accomplish by holding both shoulder buttons, whereas in X it was kind of a tricky but powerful technique you could only really pull off situationally with certain character builds. Just that little bit of extra control in GX makes an immense difference. The game also comes with a calibration setting just in case you feel your controller's off, so that's pretty cool. For a game as challenging as F-Zero, I think it's fantastic that the developers seem intent on prioritizing great control. On the top of my head, I can't really think of any issues I have with the controls of F-Zero GX. Obviously, it isn't fun when your machine starts to swerve out of control, but that's also an intentional game mechanic. You know, it's kind of a never risk-reward. The point is, I find that when I die or lose a race in GX, it's my fault. Most of the time. With GX in particular, Nagoshi said he wanted the courses to have something of a rhythmic feel, and I think I see what he means. For starters, they definitely feel a lot longer than the N64 courses did, which kinda adds to the intensity of a race. As it goes on, you wonder if you can keep it up. It almost feels like the race is a bit of a journey of its own. There's a sense of balanced flow to these stages. Often they'll have calm straightaways with just enough space for you to get your bearings, followed by elaborate turns or jumps, giving the music just enough time to really kick in once things get going. The addition of final lap music makes this all the better, especially because in some of the more radical courses, you might not have much energy to spare by the end. In other words, this image. So, I don't really have a lot more to say on the core racing gameplay. It pretty much operates under the same rules as F-Zero X, just given a smooth GameCube makeover. And this is where I kind of link it back to Super Monkey Ball. That game is about as simple as it's gonna get on the GameCube, but I think it's a real barrel of monkeys. It's a fun game. A lot of that fun comes from the fact that the core of a game is only about basic analog movement, and yet it can be hard as balls. Alright, I'll stop. Now, F-Zero definitely has more going on, that's for sure, but when approaching the idea of making a new game in the F-Zero series, Amusement Vision seemed to tackle it like they did their own Super Monkey Ball. F-Zero GX doesn't really introduce an array of new gimmicks, it didn't complicate the control scheme, it didn't add, backflipping clowns who throw VCRs, it was just F-Zero. And that makes it sound like a rehash or something, but it's not meant to, as the focus was simply on making the best iteration of what already existed and flourished on its base gameplay, just like Super Monkey Ball 2. Now, it'd be pretty lame if all I had to say on F-Zero GX was,
It's F-Zero, but on the GameCube.
so luckily, there's more to this game than its Grand Prix experience. Again, they wanted it to be the best, not just more of the same. So let's get on with, oh man, oh boy, the infamous story mode. That's right, for the first time in the series, the team wanted to utilize the unique F-Zero universe and really flesh out its characters and world within the game itself. Oh, that's really awesome to hear. Oh boy, can't wait to see what fun Nintendo antics we'll get into this time. Okay, so these cutscenes are pretty out there. To say the CG animation hasn't aged well would falsely imply that it looked great for the time, and even without dialogue, you could tell something's a little goofy about the sound design. It has a distinct, uncanny energy to it with the swanky music and Black Shadow laughing like a pansy. Once you check out the scenes with dialogue though, the audio balance is so bad that Sonic Adventure 2 Battle would blush, and this is some of the worst voice acting I've heard in my entire life. The casting is wrong, the delivery is wrong, the direction is wrong. It is like I want to just watch all the cutscenes with you, but that's what the YouTube uploads are for, so I'll have to pick between my favorite children for this one.
You stole the prize money from us last time. You will pay for that.
The next race is going to start! Hey, where do you think you're taking me? Wait! Well, still alive it seems, but I won't miss this chance to make mincemeat of you. Black Shadow, I'll show you. You'll never beat me.
Oh my god. And no, there's no Japanese voiceover, the hokey antics are here to stay for players of all regions. Honestly, despite what any interview will say, there's no way they didn't do this shit on purpose. It couldn't be, because the story itself, well, it's one of the ages, I gotta admit. Right, so you start up the game, and the first thing you see is Black Shadow essentially getting stuffed in a locker by this new mysterious bully who demands that he win F-Zero races. Black Shadow is supposed to be this ruthless villain, you know, kind of Captain Falcon's arch nemesis, but the entire game he just... yeah. Then you get to play as Captain Falcon in a VR training course. Given the fact that a lot of new players are probably going to click the story mode first, it works great as a tutorial for the Grand Prix. Aside from making sure you have a good grip on the game's controls, what else does it teach you? The game's not easy. I think most people will tell you that when you first try this, even the earlier levels will take a surprising amount of time to beat. Unfortunately, I can only tell and not show, as obviously I'm not just beginning. Actually, when recording for this video, it quickly became apparent to me that the baseline story mode just isn't a challenge for me at all anymore. Like, uncharacteristically so. Dude, I've heard legends of how brutal this thing is for so long, and for a while, I sure felt it. But I don't know what happened. I just can't play this game on anything but the hardest difficulty now. Yeah, the story mode that everyone says is so hard has 2 even harder difficulties. Talk about getting the kids addicted. This shit will hardwire your reflexes, man. There are only 9 chapters, each with their own specially made courses and challenges to segregate it from a Grand Prix. You'll have some standard races, but then you'll also have point A to point B levels, like this 1v1 with Samurai Goro, this moment where you need to escape an exploding building with Jodie Summer, or the well-known Black Shadow's Trap, where if your speed drops to a certain point, you die. It's a really short campaign, but each mission can feel like a puzzle you're trying to crack for minutes, potentially hours on end. And aside from an occasional dick move in the course design, I don't know, it's kind of a scenario where where I'm loving every second of me being stuck there, hitting the retry button over and over. You really get the feeling that these guys were sitting here for ages playtesting this thing, because each chapter is memorable in the way you open it up and you're like, oh boy, the last mission was hard enough. What are they gonna do to me now? In fact, I noticed that I now have a decent amount of hair on my chest upon playing this. And of course, I don't really think that's very attractive, but anyway, to get back to the story itself, the context of these missions is a bunch of filler until Chapter 7. It's literally just Captain Falcon running into all sorts of weird trouble on his way to the next Grand Prix. And then when you get there, the game's gotta jump the shark to get to the other side. After Black Shadow fails to get rid of Captain Falcon using his oddly specific speed bomb, our hero once again prevails in the next F-Zero Grand Prix. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the bully from the beginning of the game shows up and frickin' disintegrates Black Shadow. That looks so awful. This guy announces himself as Deathborn, leader of the F-Zero underworld. Yes, you heard right. Satan himself wants in on that racing action.
Why don't you and I race each other tomorrow? Surely, as champion, you have to accept.
Okay. Our champion accepts this new challenge and goes to the underworld where Deathborn, I shit you not, tells Falcon that both the underworld and our world have champions belts that, when combined, decide the fate of the entire universe. How did the universe become tied to man-made hovercar racing? Why did Deathborn need Black Shadow to get the champion's belt of the overworld? I couldn't tell you, but fuck yeah, let's go! The race with Deathborn is a grueling challenge littered with magma, bombs, tight corners, death ceilings, and fittingly aggressive AI behavior. Truly a hellish landscape for all to behold. And yet, that's not even the end of it. Sorry. So Captain Falcon goes home with the literal manifestation of the universe at his belt, but wait, I am not kidding, I am not making this up. The belt actually houses the creators of the universe, who then reveal that they created Deathborn, and now that Captain Falcon's beaten him, they will take his soul. Unless he can beat them in a race! Say what you will about the plot, but the game designers at least did a good job making the actual journey ascend in stakes. It's just you versus a staff ghost. No obstacles, no tricks, no railings, only tense, otherworldly music making you forget to breathe. That's right, this time you're going for God on Rainbow Road. No, wait, we already went there. Upon finally beating this game, upon finally proving that you are a badass super player, Captain Falcon takes off his helmet with no words, as he has just surpassed existence by the power of extreme racing. Wow, if that isn't the greatest story ever told, I don't know what is. This story mode is a bunch of ridiculous fun. They had to have known. The credits music literally contains such inspiring lyrics as, "When myopic confusion threatens your lunch, Falcon will be unleashing a Falcon punch. Thank heaven he's on the right side, or else there'd be nowhere to hide." The dramatically cheesy presentation definitely adds an extra level of arcade atmosphere to the game, almost as if intentional levity to release you from the intense gameplay. This is the game that Drake was playing on the Game Sphere. Looking past the theatrics though, the game is paced in a way to where it doesn't feel like you're doing the same thing every mission, further provoking the player to put their skills to the test once they're done becoming a master of the Grand Prix. For the purpose of adding onto the existing gameplay in a meaningful way that doesn't take from the core experience, you really can't go wrong with these challenging scenarios. Now, if we're moving on to the topic of extra stuff to do, there certainly is a bunch of it in F-Zero GX. Honestly, my biggest problem with X is that there really wasn't a lot to it. Sure, they've now created a super badass racer with replayability in its mechanics, but it's kind of a one-trick pony. GX isn't quite so limited by the confines of the N64, so from the beginning, there's more they could delve into. Once Once you eventually do beat each of the story chapters on very hard, and oh trust me, I needed quite a few rage-filled Discord calls to get me through it, you can finally unlock the newcomers who are playable by default in the arcade version. But why stop at just unlocking racers? Indeed, with F-Zero GX, the rest of the world now has the chance to unlock parts and customize their very own machines. It has limited aesthetic capabilities, but it's a pretty novel idea nonetheless. Definitely gives you something to dick around with when you need to unwind. You can even make your own little emblems if you have the patience for it. However, there's just one little big problem with this machine editor. Actually, it's a pretty major problem for the entire playable roster, and thus the core gameplay. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but the stats you see in this game are almost always genuine lies. Not like there are other contributing factors that make racers play a little differently than they may seem. Oh no, all these returning racers have the same visible stats as they did in X, but there's proof that this is just bullshit. Black Shadow is really fun in F-Zero X because he almost never slides out of control, can remass with virtually no repercussions, and has some crazy top speed. In this game, well, he's still one of the best if you can get to grips with him, but he sure can't get to grips because he has none. He slides around like a figure skater. What happened? This is a Class A prank from some cheeky employee at Amusement Vision. How are you supposed to effectively create a doomsday machine if you don't even know what each part's going to do? It also doesn't help that by this metric, the stat distribution is all kinds of unbalanced, leading to many racers just outright sucking by direct comparison to others. But hey, I guess that's some extra challenge for you. Thankfully, we have some pretty competent guides out there on the web to help us select our favorite racers, but that's not cool, guys. Well, aside from that one, the other fun shenanigans in this game make sure I don't stay mad at it. With the Nintendo GameCube, there's yet more room for them to do what they want with the F-Zero universe, and clearly they had intent to do so. In F-Zero X, the best you were offered was an end quote and illustration for each character you beat a cup with. Some of them were more interesting than others, but F-Zero GX thought there should be a little more to these characters than just some artwork. Now, whenever you earn first place in a Grand Prix, you get the chance to have Mr. Zero interview your character. Beating higher difficulties will also unlock some of the more interesting and character-specific questions, alongside a generally more enthusiastic tone for the interview. In traditional F-Zero fashion, it's goofy and one note, especially with the game's fantabulous voice acting. It's also a cute detail how Mr. Zero will be shaking in fear if you decide to play as one of the more deadly racers. Not everyone's a winner, but some of these interactions can be pretty damn funny, maybe even disturbingly so.
That's a great machine you've got there.
This is my brother!
I'd love to ride in that kind of machine just once in my life.
But if you thought that was weird, if you thought the F-Zero GX team had exhausted their stash, you'd be dead wrong. Folks, in this game, if you bust your ass to beat a cup on Master difficulty with the character of your choosing, you will unlock their special Victory FMV. Viewer discretion is advised. No, this is not even me cherry picking the worst one. Just about every one of these is on its own level of insanity. Some of these are genuinely, unironically pretty funny, like Captain Falcons or Black Shadows, but then you get stuff like this, which is like, and then you get ones like Samurai Goros, which are the most unfinished looking things I've seen in my life. It's pretty great. In all seriousness, I feel like the team was just that strapped for time and money, but they were already dead set on the idea of a story mode, so they were like, fuck it, let's just go apeshit with all the CG assets we have and hope people are amused. I mean, it worked for me. However, the amusement isn't just ironic, as each of these characters also have their own theme songs. That's right, 41 character themes. You'll hear these not only in the ending FMVs, but also in the pilot profiles, where you can read up on the character backstories and view their machine information, a feature I really wish they had in the previous game. The accompanying music is super fun. Some of the tracks will have corny vocals, some of the tracks will be dank futuristic pieces, some of them will be outright alien in composition, but the one constant is that they sound good and have that F-Zero impact. On the other hand, you have the rest of the soundtrack, which primarily shifts the focus from F-Zero X's thrash metal to intense techno beats. Only what one would expect from the future that was the game. This soundtrack is as Sega as it gets. Tons of adrenaline pumping, arcade music with stylish solos and engaging instrumentation that solidifies the legacy of the music right up with its classic brethren. It'll be hard to pick some favorites, but I do feel I must. At this point, I'm just stalling. I think you guys kinda understand, right? I found new love in F-Zero GX. I know, I get it. I've been spending half of this whole GX segment memeing it up and looking at all the kooky elements of a game that don't really affect you when you're on your front bumper, doing a pirouette, setting the ground on fire, and opening up the gates of Hades, but I focused on that stuff with a purpose. That purpose is not quite to say that this game is, like, ironically enjoyable. I really don't find that I adore games because they're stupid. No. What I see in F-Zero GX is motivation, drive, and heart. The intent behind the game wasn't cynical. It wasn't a game made by committee, it was a real project that had passion and love put into it. Not only was this passion the vision of Nagoshi, but it represented something in the industry. F-Zero GX, despite being published on Nintendo hardware, is one of Sega's classics. It has the trademark performance and speed of Sonic the Hedgehog, the arcade racing spirit of Nagoshi's own Daytona USA, and yes, the same weird fifth-dimensional thinking as Super Monkey Ball. It even comes with cute little references to Sega properties, such as Billy's new II belt and newcomer PJ with his groovy taxi. I like to think that this collaboration led to the Blue Falcon and Black Bull surnames being used in Shadow the Hedgehog. But more to the point, they didn't just stop at making this the definitive F-Zero racing experience, they wanted to really pump this bitch up with a bunch of content too. Content that is right up my alley. You know, little and silly as it may be, it does wonders towards making the game feel special. I don't really know how long this game was in development for, but it's no secret that Amusement Vision didn't have all the time in the world to make good with this arcade technology. So how they went about that was deciding to not focus on multiplayer, thus not really dedicating their resources towards LAN play, and instead deciding to focus their efforts on a single player experience where you can unlock a whole bunch of goodies and be met with carefully calculated difficulty. Difficulty which will create unforgettable memories. Truly, I think the legacy of F-Zero GX could be best summed up by a statement from longtime F-Zero artist Takaya Imamura, who took a role of a supervisor for this title. Of course, since I have worked on the F-Zero series and seen the results of a collaboration with Sega, I found myself at something of a loss as to how we can take the franchise further past F-Zero GX and AX. This statement would go on to be awfully prophetic. Today, we are heading into the Nintendo Switch's 4th year, and there is still no word on a new F-Zero game. The F-Zero series just turned 30 years old, and F-Zero GX alone is on its way to being 18. Ugh, what happened? I mean, GX sold enough to be a player's choice title. Surely, Sega's efforts would prime the series up for a sequel on the Wii or Wii U, right? Well, no. But if you could believe it, 2003 contained even more for F-Zero than just GX and AX. An entire anime series known as F-Zero Legend of Falcon, or GP Legend in the West, was produced and released with a GBA tie-in video game. I won't really talk too much about these here, but I will say that the animes surprisingly stand out. Nothing really amazing, but there was a decent attempt here if you're looking for them to take just about all the characters from the games and actually tell a story with them. It also has a stellar theme song and this famous theme, which I've played on repeat, oh, so many times. That shit never gets old. Back on topic though, 2003 definitely marked a really big push for this little racing series, and that raises further questions about why the franchise suddenly died. GP Legend got cancelled 15 episodes in due to poor ratings on 4Kids TV. The second GBA game based on the show wasn't released in the West since the anime no longer existed there. The earlier tie-in game also sold like shit despite being pretty good, and then boom, F-Zero was relegated to Smash Bros appearances and cameos in other games, seemingly forever. But surely we can't blame the failure of these lower budget handheld games for the loss of our precious F-Zero, right? Point taken, but still, could these really undo what the previous console games achieved? Well, the truth is that while Nagoshi and Imamura may regard F-Zero GX fondly, the business side of a coin is a lot moldier. The F-Zero series, at least by any observation that we can make with the current sales data, only declined in units sold since its first outing. Certainly X and GX sold enough to be considered successful, but the long term didn't look so exciting to Nintendo. Particularly, any word we've received about the future of F-Zero has usually come from Shigeru Miyamoto, and it's not been great. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly in 2007, Miyamoto outright said that Nintendo was not pleased with the results the other development teams gave F-Zero. It seems kinda clear that the big F-Zero push in 2003 was expected to really boost the series from its then current status. The idea that it didn't was enough for Miyamoto to believe that F-Zero had run its final lap, going on in 2012 to say that he thought people had gotten weary of F-Zero, which then leads to the question that Miyamoto seems most concerned with when met with the prospect of a new F-Zero. Why F-Zero? What do you want that we haven't done before? Now, this is where most people would probably say Miyamoto is pretty out of touch. I mean, the only breadcrumb we've been given is that he wants a new controller interface that would make a new F-Zero game interesting again. I don't know, looks pretty unique to me, but if I may be so bold, I think there actually is a solid point hidden within the madness. Don't get me wrong, I don't think I'm on Miyamoto's wavelength. The dude says the series has evolved very little, which, no, I would actually argue that it's evolved to a fault. You see, his question of what do you want that we haven't done before is actually a valid one, which is why I'm so puzzled that he wants what sounds like a controller-centric gimmick. The series procedurally built upon foundations that already existed in the past. That was its bread and butter. F-Zero wasn't this game that they would just throw about and play ball with. It was a hardcore experience. Emphasis on the core. If the gameplay can only be marginally changed from that point, what does that mean? If I'm to take a guess, I suppose this is one of those Nintendo innovation moments, where they don't want to do something standard. They would rather come up with some unforeseen idea and hope it works. Maybe that's what Miyamoto has been seeking this entire time, but I think that'd be a questionable idea with a series so mechanically tuned as this. And perhaps he does too. Sure, we could go ahead and make a new F-Zero game where we get an adventure mode that involves going around and falcon punching people, and, well, actually that sounds fucking awesome. But the problem is that something like that would take major time away from polishing the core racing. Something like that could easily split the player base and lead to awkward compromises. Changes made to the actual core gameplay could lead to reactions that rival that of Star Fox Zero. It's something to be careful with. I guess then the question remains to be answered. What do I want in a new F-Zero? The answer is, I don't know. The more I think about what a new F-Zero game is, it is just GX with an HD coat of paint and some new extra features. But what after that? The road ahead for the F-Zero franchise looks to be kind of a dead end at the moment. I hope it's not. I hope that instead of a dead end, it's actually a large ramp that inspires a leap of faith. However, a lot has changed since F-Zero's hiatus. Many games have come out, console generations have passed. The being of what is and is not impressive has drastically shifted. Even within the sphere of driving games, one begins to ask if F-Zero even really has a place in today's market. Arcade action seems to die more and more as we shift to games emulating real life, or games embracing the idea of being an art form. A lot of the more niche stuff like F-Zero tends to originate from lucky and talented indie developers. Is Nintendo really so eager to pour in sufficient time, funding, and marketing when it didn't meet their expectations during the more primitive GameCube era? For that matter, does Nintendo see F-Zero as a sort of cannibalistic competition to Mario Kart? I think I would say it isn't. The appeal, audience, and design of both franchises is drastically different, but you know, Nintendo's not really been pulling out a bunch of racing games, so maybe. Perhaps F-Zero in 2021 is more of a spirit than anything. Long have we seen the series lay dormant, making cameo after cameo, and of all Nintendo franchises this happens to, it appears more telling with F-Zero. Captain Falcon doesn't have new adventures to go on like Samus does, but Captain Falcon does share a struggling longevity with Fox McCloud. Nintendo knows how much people want F-Zero. They know what it meant in the past, for them. That is why they consistently dangle its namesake over us, because they know it'll at least spark interest from the real gamers. And I mean, if you were to literally defeat God, what else could you do other than let your legacy speak for itself? Perhaps they were so focused on creating the future of racing that once the actual future got here, the race was already over. Once you create a good future, all you can do is enjoy and maintain the present. I can consistently play X and GX. Those games used to be so brutal to me, but now I play masterclass courses like I'm just peacefully riding a bike, and maybe cursing out the occasional rock in the bike lane. If they ever did return to F-Zero, could they even truly replicate the level of passion that went into GX? The mad lad Nagoshi is actually still on board with the idea. I think if anyone could do it, it'd be his team, but will Nintendo ever allow him to reignite the engine? Unless they feel like dating this video, I guess I could say that for once I have a series I can take the satisfaction in seeing the ending of, rather than witnessing it become a factory-made rust bucket with no integrity.
Forever you will be my hero.